Good morning, guys. So I am doing this. Here's the third part of our bias lesson. Okay. So we talked about a couple different forms of bias last time. We talked about three of them. We're going to add two more to that list, and then we're going to work through some examples, and we're going to see where we kind of check our understanding. Okay. So the negativity bias occurs when an individual tends to give more weight to the negative aspects of something over the positive ones. Okay, that is a very common thing for humans to do when we have you could think of having a full day of things that happen that could be good or bad, but the ones that weigh on us the most happen to be the ones that feel a little bit more negative. That's a very common thing, right? So that is another form of bias. And then we have the affinity bias, which is when this individual gravitates towards people that are similar to themselves. Okay, they tend to socialize or connect with people that have similar traits while avoiding those that they feel might be different from them. And it's also known as similarity bias. Okay, I feel like this is something that I definitely find myself doing when it comes to beliefs. Right, I spend time with people that are kind of aligned with the same views as me. It's something I'm always trying to be conscious of and aware of. So here's some examples. We're going to read through a few scenarios together, and for each one, I'm gonna have you guys decide which bias we're speaking of. Okay. So again, I'm gonna just a little refresher about the other bias, the different types of bias we've gone over. So the anchoring bias again is when a person very heavily looks and focuses on one trait or piece of information. So think of that anchor, like pulling them down to that one piece of information. Okay, when they're making a decision. Okay, the blind spot bias occurs when someone is able to recognize bias in other people, but not in themselves. We have confirmation bias, which is when somebody only trusts or believes informational sources that confirm their current existing viewpoints. Okay, that's kind of that example that I gave about my sister and myself. When we are different, we have different beliefs, but we're both very much only looking for the information that we know will confirm how we already feel, right? So that is confirmation bias. The negativity bias, again, is when somebody focuses more on the negative aspect of things. And the affinity bias or the similarity bias is when people gravitate towards people that are more like them and they see everybody else as just different. Okay. So those are the five. We're going to go through these examples, and I'm going to ask you to jot down which bias I'm referring to in this example. Okay. So example 1, Maria is the captain of the math club at her school, and they are preparing for an upcoming competition. In selecting her teammates, She chooses a new student that she does not know. Even though she is unfamiliar with his skills, she thinks it is a good choice because he is Asian. And Maria believes that Asian students are good at math. During practice, the student makes several comments about girls being inferior at math, and Maria complains to her teacher that his bias makes her feel uncomfortable. Okay, so in your journal, I want you to jot down which one you think this is. Is it anchoring bias? Is it blind spot bias? Is it confirmation bias? Is it negativity bias? Affinity bias? So take a second. Again, anchoring bias is relying heavily on one piece of information. Blind spot is when you can see your other people's bias but not your own. Confirmation is when you're only looking for sources that reiterate how you already feel. Negativity is when you're focusing on the negative, and affinity is when you're gravitating towards people who are similar to yourself. Okay. Next example. So again, write this down in your journal. Which one is it? Example 2, Miss Wilson is a teacher who works in a mostly white school district, and she is excited to meet her new students on the first day of 7th grade. During her first hour of class, one of her students, a black female, is chatty and disruptive in her class. Nevertheless, Miss Wilson is determined that the rest of her classes will run smoothly. As her second hour students shuffle into the room during passing period, she says to the only black female student in the room, "Class starts in 2 minutes, so get all of your talking out of your system now. I'm telling you now that I'm not going to allow disruptions in my classroom." So which one is it? Is it the anchoring bias? Is it the blind spot bias? The confirmation bias, the negativity bias, or what's the other one? Affinity bias. Which one? Write it down. At the end, we're going to go over the answers, okay? Example 3. Eliza is a young white woman, and it is her first day in a new town and a new school. She is excited to meet new friends. When she walks into the cafeteria in the morning, she notices a sea of diverse groups of students in front of her. She sees a group of white females in the corner, so she walks over to their table and asks if she could sit down. Which one is it? Anchoring, blind spot, confirmation, negativity, or affinity bias? Which ones? Example 4. Mark says in class, Jewish people are rich. His classmate Jessica responds by saying, that's not true. I'm Jewish and my family doesn't have a lot of money. Mark hears her, but disregards her statement because he knows many Jewish families that are wealthy. Therefore, he knows he's right. Anchoring, right? Again, anchoring is relying heavily on one piece of information. We have the blind spot. You see other bias, but not your own. I know I'm repeating this, but I think it might be necessary because it's a lot of information. Confirmation is reiterating things based on you're reading things that are going to confirm how you feel. Negativity is you're focusing on the negative. And the affinity bias is when you're gravitating towards people that are more like you. Okay. Last example. Jaime is in English class where the teacher is leading a lesson about Martin Luther King. After his teacher makes a comment about what a powerful writer and speaker Dr. King was, John says, he wasn't that great. I heard he cheated on his wife. Which one is it? I'm not going to repeat it again because you're probably driving you nuts. But write it down. And here are the answers. Okay. The blind spot bias. Example 1. Okay. That was the one about Maria, right? She seems to be aware that she's biased, right? Because in her mind, in her attitude, Asian students are smart and they're good at math, right? So that was where she was coming from. But then she was able to recognize the other dude being sexist by saying, like, girls can't do this, okay? So students, bias can be favorable or unfavorable. So say she's saying, oh, he's really smart. He's Asian, right? But that's still a bias, and that still might not feel good to that other person on the other side of it, okay? Okay, so she was able to recognize the bias in others, but she was overlooked the bias in herself, right? The bias that she had. Okay, example 2, that was anchoring bias. So that was Miss Wilson, that teacher, right? She's limited interactions with black students, right? Because she's in mostly white school district. So in her first class, she has some disruptive student from a black student in her class. So then she holds on to that experience and is biased against the student in her next class who also happens to be a black student. And it has nothing to do with that student in that period, right? So she is simply attributing her bias towards her other black female student because she is unfairly expecting this other student in her new class, to be disruptive as well. So that is called anchoring. She's holding on to that one piece of information, right? And generalizing based on that. Okay. The third one, affinity bias. This is a straightforward one, right? She's Eliza. She's a white woman. She goes and sees in the cafeteria there's a group of white girls. That's where she goes, right? So she's passing on the opportunity to make connections with other students because she doesn't step out of her comfort level, right? She's more comfortable doing that, which doesn't give her the opportunity to create these new relationships, right? So the fourth one is confirmation bias. Okay, so he made a blanket statement about Jewish people that was incorrect. Okay, so when she offers evidence that that's not true, he still just ignores it. He's like, well, all the people I know are rich and, right? So he disregards it entirely. Okay. Oh, the last one was negativity bias. So, MLK has obviously contributed to so much in our culture and our society. But he feels the urge John feels the urge to comment about something that is irrelevant to the discussion, right? But he gives it more attention than it logically deserves because that's where his focus is, on the negative. Okay. So those are all those examples. And what I want you to do as a class, please do discuss how you feel about the series of lessons. Okay, we're done with the 3 lessons now, all about bias. We talked about the 5 types of bias. We talked about examples and what those look like in the real world. So how do you feel about the lessons? How do you feel about talking about this? And like maybe looking into yourself a little bit about what your biases are, right? Was it easy? Was it difficult? So this is a discussion that I'd like you to have as a class. Thanks, guys. Have a good day. We'll see you next time.